As Amy said, I'm co-chair of the Social Action Committee at Bethesda Jewish Congregation. And our co-chair, Robin Sorkin, is in one of those little squares. Hi, Robin. So happy that you're doing this with me. I've been an admirer of Julius Rosenwald's legacy for some time, ever since I saw the documentary of his incredible generosity and clear-headed philosophy of giving. In fact, I even discovered at the time I saw the documentary that through my work in adult literacy, I was in a building, the Thurgood Marshall Foundation in Washington, DC, which had been the first historic Black YMCA building, designed by William Pittman, son-in-law of Booker T. Washington, with funds contributed by none other than Julius Rosenwald. So 6 degrees of separation, him to me. And you're going to hear about the Washington-Rosenwald relationship in a moment. So I became thoroughly engaged, I got more informed, and I'm now so delighted to bring this National Park campaign to our social action mission at BJC as an initiative. And we support it under our theme of show you care, do your share, a phrase that Mr. Rosenwald lived out through his whole life. So today, in a small way, I'm hoping it'll resonate with you and you will feel, as Robin and I do, that this campaign is not only unique, but the perfect way to recognize the impact and the legacy of Julius Rosenwald. And now I'm thrilled to turn this over to Diane Horn, who's BJC's program co-chair, who will lead us into the presentation.
Right, thank you. When Helen approached Joan Kaufman and myself, my co-chair, about doing a joint program, we immediately were interested. We were intrigued that I didn't even realize there was a campaign to make a national park from the schools. And I'm going to learn as much about this as I can tonight. And I would like very much to introduce our speaker. I'm going to read to you what I have found. She is the president of the board of directors for the campaign for Rosenwald Parks. Prior to her retirement, Dr. Canter was a nationally recognized expert in the decontamination of bioterrorism agents and in preparedness activities for responding to and recovering with weapons of mass destruction. First at the US EPA and then at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab. But she's been a lifelong lover of national parks. She's visited over 300. And if you said there are 423, that's really something. That's really something. And she was a founding member of the Friends of Fort Hunt Park, which perhaps she'll get into as well. And we're just delighted to have you tell us about your mission. So, Dr. Dorothy Canter.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the Bethesda Jewish Congregation. Thank you to Helen and the members of the committee. And thank you especially to Amy Cortez. We're going to see whether her training of my IT limited abilities has paid off. So I'm going to share screen and see. We got it. Okay. So, yes, thank you. I don't know if I'll be able to do it again though, Amy. But I can say do it once and quit while I'm ahead. So I'm going to talk to you today about Julius Rosenwald. I'm going to talk to you about his philanthropy. I'm going to talk to you about his business, his philanthropy, and then I'm going to talk to you about the Rosenwald Park campaign. And so I'm going to start with Julius Rosenwald. And his parents were German Jewish immigrants. His father came here with very little money. He started out as a peddler on foot I believe, but I'm not sure, but he was in the West Virginia area. And he finally made enough money to get a horse and cart. He then met his wife-to-be, Augusta, and they got married, and her family was in the clothing business. And they went to manage several stores, and they ended up in Springfield, Illinois, the capital of Illinois. And what you see in front of you is Julius Rosenwald's boyhood home. He was not born here, but he grew up here. And what is important about this home is that it's diagonally across the street from Abraham Lincoln's home. Now, Rosenwald was born in 1862, so he never saw Lincoln alive. His parents' store, though, I think profited during the Civil War, selling uniforms. So you can see from the home that they did well. They were middle class. But Julius Rosenwald did not finish high school, not because he couldn't, but he went to New York to learn the clothing trade from his uncles, who were rich people and had, I think they were in clothing manufacturing and sales. And here's a photo, a portrait of the young Julius Rosenwald. Well, he learned the trade, and while he was in New York, he left school in, I think, when he was about 17 years old. And while he was in New York, he did open a store, and a very significant recession came along, and the store was not able to succeed. So he ended up in Chicago, and he had a manufacturing business with a relative, and they were making men's suits. And this is important because in 1895, and also at this point in his life, he was not wealthy, he was not poor, he was reasonably well off. But in 1895, Richard Sears of Sears, Roebuck and Company came to Julius Rosenwald's brother-in-law, Aaron Nussbaum. Now, Nussbaum had made a lot of money in the 1893 Chicago World's Exposition because he had the soft drink concession. And Richard Sears wanted a new partner because Alva Roebuck was leaving the business. Now, let me go back just a minute, because Richard Sears started out as a railway agent in Minnesota. And it was often, the manufacturers would often send goods to stores that they had not ordered on the premise that a number of them would keep the goods and sell them. In this case, there was a batch of watches and the jeweler refused them. And Richard Sears saw the opportunity to sell the watches, and he did, and he made quite a bit of money. And from that came Sears Roebuck. And Alva Roebuck was a watchmaker, watch repairer, and they teamed up. And Richard Sears was, they said that Richard Sears could sell a breath of air. He was just an amazing salesman, but he was not a good businessman. And that is perhaps why Roebuck was leaving the company. So he was going to sell Aaron Nussbaum a half share in Sears Roebuck for $75,000. And Nussbaum, being a good businessman, went to his brother-in-law, Julius, and said, "Will you take half of this?" And Rosenwald didn't have to think very long, and he said, "Yes. Besides, Richard Sears owes me money." So he went into the business, and it was very disorganized. If they didn't have the good that was ordered, they'd send another good. So there were numerous returns. The business was scattered in different buildings across Chicago because he'd moved from Minnesota to Chicago. So Julius Rosenwald took over, and he had his business acumen made all the difference to Sears Roebuck. And he is the person who originated the saying, satisfaction, or you're guaranteed, or your money back. He made sure that the goods that were being sold were of quality, and he eliminated those that were not. He brought into being a schedule system developed by one of his employees for getting the products out. And so what was, if everything that was ordered from one department, it had to go out in one day. If it was ordered from multiple departments, it had to be gathered together in a central place and go out in 2 days. And the managers were held accountable. If they didn't adhere to this schedule, then they were docked. And so in 1906, they built this enormous facility in western part of Chicago, North Lawndale. And at the time, it was considered the biggest merchandising center in the world. And I'm going to try to use my pointer. Here is the original Sears Tower. Here is the power plant. They had railroad tracks coming into the plant. This here, it was the administration building, and right here in this area was Julius Rosenwald's executive offices. And here they also built this park with a sunken garden and fountains, and this was for the employees to enjoy when they had time off. Just for your information today, all of this is gone. The tower remains. It's now been renovated, and its nonprofits are there. The power plant is now a school. The administration building still remains, and I'll mention that later. So in 1906, they had this great merchandising plant, but they needed to have money to pay off the loans, to pay for it. So they went to New York, Richard Sears and Julius Rosenwald, and they met with this man who had been a roommate of Rosenwald's in his first days in New York, and his name was Henry Goldman. And they went to Goldman and they said, well, we would like to get a loan. And Goldman said, well, why get a loan? Go public. And Goldman was Goldman Sachs. And that was one of the first public offerings, and that made all the difference. And Julius Rosenwald became richer than his wildest dreams. And here are two postcards, vintage postcards, that the campaign is in the collecting. This one, on the top one right here, is the wrapping and mailing division, and down here is the freight, and it shows how the process worked for getting the goods together to go out. Now, Julius Rosenwald and Richard Sears, made Sears what it was. It was Sears' visionary salesmanship, and it was Julius Rosenwald's business acumen. And after the First World War, business was going great. Sears was building up its inventories, and then a recession hit, a big recession. And Julius Rosenwald did not cancel orders because he was an honorable man. And so he was bringing in even more inventory when prices were dropping dramatically. And so in 1921, word went out on the street, Wall Street, word went out in the financial district, word went out among the newspapers that Sears might go under, might declare bankruptcy. But Sears did not declare bankruptcy because Julius Rosenwald loaned the company $20 million of his own funds, and they recovered. And this is the New York Times newspaper of December 30th. Where am I? 1921, with the front page article that he pledged $20 million for Sears Roebuck. So Julius Rosenwald not only helped to make Sears, but in his day, he also saved Sears. I won't go into what happened recently with Sears. Okay, so even before he became very wealthy, he believed in tzedakah. He was giving money. His rabbi at the Chicago Sinai congregation was a famous rabbi, Emil Hirsch, who believed in social justice and put his money where his mouth is. And Julius Rosenwald was giving money to the YMCA in Chicago. Now this comes 1910. It's the beginning of the Great Migration. Blacks were coming to the northern cities. There was no place to live. There were no hotels. And Julius Rosenwald said to the leaders of the YMCA, I will give $25,000 to every city that will put up $75,000 independently to build a YMCA. And keep this in mind because this was his approach to most of his philanthropy, namely a challenge grant. And so by the end of the time that these facilities were built, there were 24 YMCAs and there were 2 YWCAs. And over here on the left, this was the Wabash Avenue YMCA in Chicago. I think it was the first one to be built. This is in Philadelphia. And Helen told you about the Thurgood Marshall Center, and I can't remember if it's 10th Street or 12th Street off of U Street in Washington, D.C., that Julius Rosenwald, he wasn't the original donor to that, but the Rockefellers had put up money and the costs were over what they expected. And Rockefeller said, I'm not putting any more. And the president, Taft, went directly to Rosenwald and he put up the money to finish this YMCA. So enter Booker T. Washington. Now, Booker T. Washington was born a slave. He was educated at Tuskegee. I'm sorry, he was educated at the Hampton Institute, and he went on to found Tuskegee in Alabama, near Montgomery, Alabama. And not only was he a very excellent and brilliant administrator, but he was a terrific fundraiser. And so I think, I can't, document it, but I think he heard of Julius Rosenwald, and he goes to Chicago, and Julius Rosenwald holds a luncheon for him in May of 1911. And the next day he takes Booker T. Washington to see the Sears plant. And shortly after that, Booker T. Washington invites Julius Rosenwald to join the board of Tuskegee. Now, Rosenwald, as I said, he was a very excellent businessman. And before he says he's going to join the board, he and his friends and family, including Rabbi Hirsch and Jane Addams, who he supported the Hull House for 20 years, they get together and they go on a train car. They rent a train car and go from Chicago to Tuskegee. Now, in 1911, that's quite a trip. And here's a vintage photo of the Tuskegee Institute, now University. And they're very impressed. And as some of you probably know, not only did the Tuskegee students build the buildings, but they made the bricks to build them. And so he was impressed and he agrees to join the Tuskegee board. And a year later, in 1912, he turns 50. And he decides that he's going to give away a lot of money. And he gave away $675,000 in 1912. That is a lot of money for his 50th birthday. $25,000 of this goes to Tuskegee. And Booker T. Washington says to Rosenwald, will you put $2,800 to build, to finance a pilot project to build 6 schools in rural Alabama for African Americans who either had no schools or very, very poor schools, even though they were paying taxes. And Rosenwald agrees, and he stipulates that for these first 6 schools, he will put up $300 for each school, but the community had to match that $300. And it could be in dollars, it could be in land, it could be in labor, it could be in materials, or some combination thereof. And the communities were very happy to do this, and the first schools were built. This is a photo of Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington on the campus of Tuskegee in the early 1915. And so after the first schools were built, Rosenwald in 1914 agrees that he will put up $30,000 to build another 100 schools in mainly Alabama. In 1916, he agrees to put up another $60,000 to build 200 more schools, again, in a challenge grant form. Now, unfortunately, Booker T. Washington had severe hypertension, and he died in November of 1915. So the man with the vision, the visionary, the man who also had the passion, did not live to see what these 6 schools really led to. So here's a photo. This was a school built during the Tuskegee phase of the Rosenwald School building program. You'll hear more about that in a minute. You see, these schools were not only places for the children to be taught, but they served as community centers as well. There was a strong community feeling there, support. Now here, most of the schools were small schools. This one is a one-teacher school, and it shows the rural nature, not only the rural nature, but there was horses and not cars. Most of the schools that were built were two-teacher schools, and I'll give you more about that later. Okay, in 1920, Rosenwald did an evaluation of the school building program, decided that it was becoming too much for Tuskegee to handle, and he moved the program to the Julius Rosenwald Fund, which was created in 1917. And from then on, they started putting out these community school building plans. And these are plans that the people who were going to build the schools had to follow. And so like here, this is a two-teacher school. They had to be on 2 acres or more of land. They did not have plumbing, so they had privies, and there were designs for the privies too. They had ball fields. They did not have electricity, and they did not have central heating. And most of the schools were built during the time frame of 1920 to 1928. The program itself, the school building program, ended in 1932. And when it was all over, and they closed up shop, there were 5,357 schools, shops, and teacher homes in 15 southern states. And they ranged from Maryland to Florida, from North Carolina to Oklahoma, and from Louisiana to Missouri. And as I mentioned, the Julius Rosenwald Fund was created in 1917 for the well-being of mankind, pretty general term. And Julius Rosenwald managed it himself between 1917 and 1928. So as important as the Rosenwald schools were in the education of nearly 1/3 of African Americans in the South, he did other work through the fund that is very important as well. And the first thing I'm going to speak about is a fellowship program that was started to help the careers of people generally in the early part of their careers. Some of them were in graduate school, some of them were just starting. And nearly 900 people received Rosenwald fellowships. And they, of that 900, 2/3 were African American. The others were white Southerners or others. Some of them received the fellowship for a year, some of it for 2, some of it for 3. And there were different categories. And the first category I'm going to talk about very briefly are scholars and dignitaries. And here are 4 examples. The one on the left is W.E.B. Du Bois. There's a lot of talk about the competition between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, but he also supported Rosenwald and the schools, and he also received fellowship. The one up here is Pauli Murray. She was really like the Renaissance woman of the 20th century. She was an activist. She was a lawyer. She became an Episcopalian minister. She was very instrumental in doing research that was important for the Brown versus Board of Education case, and also for the brief that Ruth Bader Ginsburg submitted to the Supreme Court about women's rights. And even though she didn't work on that brief, Ruth Bader Ginsburg put her name on it because she felt that Pauli Murray's contributions were that significant. The one below is Ralph Bunch. He received a fellowship. He was our representative to the UN, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I just recently read that it was because of the work he did on negotiating the the armistice between the state of Israel and its neighbors. And over here is Charles Drew, a physician who did a lot of work on plasma. Okay, the next category is contributors to Brown versus Board of Education. And there were 12 people who were fellows that contributed to the second brief for Brown versus Board of Education. And I'm going to go from here and I'm going to end up here. So this is C. Van Woodward. He was a white Southerner. He's a historian, just like John Hope Franklin, another historian who, when he started out, African Americans were not professors at white universities, but he ended up being the head of the Department of History at Duke. Down here is Mabel Murphy Smythe, and she was teaching in Japan, came back, and she headed the part of the program that did for the non-legal work on the brief. Here, I don't know if you all can see the whole thing. I'm not seeing it very well, but whatever. This is Horace Mann Bond. He was the president, first Black president of Lincoln University and father of Julian Bond. And these two people are sociologists, very important. Kenneth Clark and his wife, Mamie Phipps Clark, both received fellowships. Her fellowships helped her get her PhD. And the work that they did as sociologists was the self-esteem of Black children. And they did the doll study where they were shown Black dolls and white dolls. And almost invariably, the children chose the white dolls. And this photo is a very famous photo. It was taken by Gordon Parks, and you'll hear about him, a photographer, in just a minute. And then another category was writers, and I'll just go through quickly. This is Langston Hughes, the famous poet and writer, part of the Harlem Renaissance. This is Ralph Ellison, who wrote Invisible Man. He used his fellowship to help him write Invisible Man. This is Zora Neale Hurston, another member of the Harlem Renaissance and good friend with Langston Hughes. Her book is Their Eyes Were Watching God. This is James Baldwin, a famous writer. And down here is a white Southerner, Lillian Smith, who received a fellowship to help her write the novel Strange Fruit, which was published in the 1940s. Okay, in terms of artists, the one here is Jacob Lawrence, a famous artist. I don't know if any of you all know this famous migration series. That was what he used his fellowship to paint. And it was broken up into, the paintings were broken up into two halves. One half went to the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C., and the other half went to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Occasionally, the two parts of the series are brought together either in Washington or in New York to be shown. And interesting, the person who donated the paintings to the Museum of Modern Art in New York was Julius Rosenwald's daughter, Adele Rosenwald. This over here is Robert Gwathmey, a white painter, but most of his paintings were of African-American subjects. This over here is Elizabeth Catlett, also a painter. This lady is Augusta Savage, who was a sculptor. And this is Gordon Parks, whose photo you saw before. He was a big civil rights photographer. And he was also a very famous fashion photographer. And he did photos for Ralph Ellison's book, Invisible Man. And an article appeared in Life in 1952 in coordination with the publication of the book that highlighted the novel. And here are entertainers. On the left is Marian Anderson singing at the Lincoln Memorial after the Daughters of the American Revolution refused to let her sing at the DAR Constitution Hall, and Eleanor Roosevelt arranged for her to speak at the Lincoln Memorial, a national park unit, and the president oversees the national park units. She used her fellowship to get training in voice in Europe. She was more famous in Europe than the US at that time. This is the dancer Pearl Primus, and this gentleman here is Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie also received a fellowship. Okay, so one of the things that I was trying to do subliminally with these categories is to show two things. One, that there were also important white people who received fellowships. And two, in that era, there were a fair number, significant number for that era of women who were receiving fellowships. So that's not only did he gave to historically Black, funded to historically Black colleges and universities, including Fisk in Nashville, Dillard University, which they helped found in New Orleans, of course, Tuskegee, Howard University in Washington, D.C., and this is Morehouse College in Atlanta. This is a statue of one of its famous presidents, Benjamin Mays, and he was the one who was the mentor to Martin Luther King. Now, before I get there, I don't have slides, but Julius Rosenwald did a lot for Jewish Americans and also for Jews around the world. And as you know, there can be competition between various Jewish social service agencies, which was the case in Chicago. And there was the German Jewish Agency, and there was the Eastern European Jewish Agency. And after a number of years, Rosenwald was got them to agree and merge, and he served as the first president of the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago. And as I mentioned, he supported Jane Addams in the Hull House. He was on her board for 20 years. And in one example where he didn't use challenge grants, he was the founding donor for the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, which if you haven't seen, I recommend that you go to see it. Now, so the Rosenwald Park campaign, it started in 2016. The goal, the mission is to have a Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald School's National Historical Park that will consist of a visitor center in Chicago where he lived, he worked, and he did his philanthropy, and a small number of Rosenwald schools from among the schools that were recommended by 14 of the 15 states in which they were built, and they were recommended to the campaign. So that's our mission. How did it all begin? I don't know. I assume that a number of you have seen Aviva Kempner's documentary. If we were together, I could say, raise your hands. But Aviva Kempner, called Rosenwald. Aviva Kempner is a Washington, D.C. filmmaker. Most of her documentaries have to do with Jewish subjects. And this documentary came out in 2015. And it was a sleepy Saturday afternoon in September of 2015. And my late husband and I wanted to see a movie. And I saw in the Washington Post section for the entertainment, the weekend section, that this was being shown at the Avalon Theater in DC. And I am Jewish. My husband was Jewish. We had never heard of Julius Rosenwald. In fact, I wouldn't have believed that it was a Jewish person who had led Sears. I always assumed that it was a very waspish organization, which it did become later. So we went to see it, and we were blown away, both of us. It was inspiring. And I turned to my husband and I said, at the end, there needs to be a national park for Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools. As I said, I didn't know anything about Julius Rosenwald, but I did know a lot about national parks because at that time, I had been a volunteer for the National Parks Conservation Association, NPCA, for 27 years. I'd been on their board and I had stayed, and as mentioned, I'd visited an awful lot of national park units, although I still have 100 to go if I make it. And I knew that not one of the nearly 420 units at that point in time, and still, celebrated the life and legacy of a Jewish American, and I decided that needed to be changed. So 4 people got together in a conference room at MPCA in the summer of 2016. 2 represented NPCA and 2 represented the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And why were they involved? Well, they were involved because they have played a very important role with Rosenwald schools. Each year they put out a list of the 11 most endangered historic places. And in 2002, Rosenwald schools were one of those places. And that led to the restoration of a number of schools with funds from the trust, from funds from Lowe's, from funds from state organizations, and it was very significant. So I'm going to talk to you about 4 Rosenwald schools. As I mentioned, we went out, the campaign went out and sought recommendations of schools from the 15 states. And we asked them for up to 5 schools. And we had criteria that we used and sent to the state historic preservation officers. And so 14 of the states recommended 55 schools and 1 teacher home. The 15th state, Missouri, did not make any recommendations because there were only 4 schools built in Missouri. 3 are gone, and 1 is being used in a manner that the state didn't feel would be appropriate for inclusion in a national historical park. All of the sites that will be selected, the visitor center and the schools, will be selected by the National Park Service. But these were recommendations made to the campaign, and we have already forwarded them to the Park Service, but I'll talk to you about that in a bit. So I'm going to talk to you about 4. 2 of them are in Maryland. The first one is the Ridgely Rosenwald School. It's in Capitol Heights, Maryland. It was originally a 2-teacher school. It was restored, and it is owned by the Prince George's County portion of the National Capital Park and Planning Commission, but it is managed to a large extent by the alumni chapter for Prince George's County of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And they have annual anniversary celebrations each year during Black History Month. The campaign has been there numerous times. We even had a board meeting there, and it's a very active school. And one of the rooms they have restored to the way it looked when it was a school. So it's a classroom right here. And of course, now you can see it's electrified. It's more than electrified. But here's a potbelly stove. The potbelly stoves heated the schools. It's not original, but these windows are original, and the schools were oriented because there was no electricity to bring in as much light as possible for the children. This is a photograph. I don't know how many of you have heard about Andrew Filer's new book called A Better Life for the Children, Julius Rosenwald, Bookert Washington, and the 4,978 schools that changed America. What is important here? This is a photo of Mildred Ridgely Gray, Ridgely School, Mildred Ridgely Gray. The Ridgely family, Ridgely and Gray family, has been involved with the school from the very beginning until the present. So that's almost 100 years. The family donated the land. Mildred Ridgely Gray went to the school. She went on, I believe she got a doctorate, and later, after the school closed with integration, it became a Head Start school, and she taught there. And unfortunately, but fortunately, she lived to be nearly 100 years old. She died, I think, shortly before the beginning of COVID. The next school I'm going to talk about is San Domingo School in Sharptown, Maryland. It's on the Eastern Shore. It was built during the Tuskegee phase of the building program. It's a three-teacher school. And this school also has a long history of family involvement. The town was a historically free Black town, and the Quinton family was involved in donating the land, and Newell Quinton, who is now running the foundation, the John Quinton Foundation, that it's now a community center. His parents had very little schooling, but they insisted that their 8 children go to school and get good educations, and all 8 of them went to college. One of them even became a physician. Mr. Quinton, who's in his 70s, is running the school, as I said now, the building. He's worried because the young people are leaving the rural area. They're going to Annapolis, they're going to Baltimore, they're going to Washington, D.C., and he's worried what will happen when this generation is gone. Also, 2 of his sisters were involved in the civil rights movement. They went to Morgan State in Baltimore, and they were involved, they protested. And it's interesting because there's a video that you can look up online called Saving San Domingo, came out this year. And the 2 sisters were arrested and put in jail, and they were just left there. But some young students from, drawing a blank, the women's school in Baltimore, came up to him and said, "Don't worry, we're going to protest. We'll get arrested and we'll all get out," which is what happened to them. So they were involved in the civil rights movement. That's another part of some of the history of some of the schools. The long family involvement, and B, involvement in the civil rights movement. And here's another, well, here's Mr. Quinton. He's really an amazing gentleman, and a photo of the school, interior of the school. And the 3rd school is Noble Hill School in Georgia, about an hour north of Atlanta, in Cassville, Georgia. And so Webster Wheeler had been a farmer and carpenter in the area, but he'd gone as part of the Great Migration to Detroit to work for the Ford Motor Company. In the early 20s, when he heard that a school was going to be built, he came back and he built it along with another man, and his son was sort of the gopher. The school was very active. As you can see, here's a photo of the school in its early years. But then an equalization school was built, and the equalization schools were part of Separate but Equal, and they were bigger schools, and they consolidated students from a number of the smaller schools, such as Noble Hill. And so Webster Wheeler's son bought the school when it closed, and it became a storage shed. Interestingly, Webster Wheeler's his grandson's wife also went to the school, Susie Weems Wheeler. She went on to become an educator, a doctor of education. She helped in integrating Bartow County, and she also helped to save the school, which is now the Noble Hill Memorial Center. And you can see it looks very much on the outside like it did back in the 20s to the 40s. And it's if you get to Atlanta, they're open, and you want to drive an hour, it's well worth seeing. And again, here is the long family history. Here is a photo inside the school from an Andrew Filer photo. Mr. Filer is very nice to let us use these photos. He's also joined our advisory council and is being very helpful. It's a photo inside of the school taken recently, and this is Valerie Coleman. This is her aunt, Marion Coleman. Marion was the curator of the center, and now Valerie is. And Valerie is holding a photo of Webster Wheeler, who helped make this all happen. The last school I'm going to talk about is Dunbar. It was originally Dunbar Junior High, Senior High, and Junior College. It's in Little Rock, Arkansas. Late in the program, they started building big schools. This was, I think, like 26 rooms. It was designed by the same architects who designed Little Rock Central High School. It's separate but unequal. It is still functioning now as a magnet middle school. As you can see, there's work here. When we visited in 2018, there were a lot of floods in the basement in the nurses area. The school now, as I said, it's still functioning. Enrollment is declining. It needs a new electrical system. It needs a new HVAC system. It needs a lot. But here's Little Rock Central High School. You can see some similarities with Dunbar, but it's much bigger. It was the White High School. It's only about a mile to a mile and a half away from Dunbar. And Little Rock Central High School was where integration was first started in Little Rock in 1957. 3 of the 9 students, the Little Rock 9, who integrated the Central High School came from Dunbar. Today, Little Rock Central High is still a functioning school, but it is part of the National Park System. It's a National Historic Site. And the gas station where the reporters ran to call in those days, remember the phone booths that you put your dime or your quarter in, it has been restored, and the phone booth is there, and there's a visitor center across the street. So in my opinion, strictly my opinion, but not speaking for the campaign, the 2 schools would make a good pair and as part of the National Park System. So, and here is a famous photo of this girl. They didn't have a phone. She was one of the Little Rock 9, the only one who didn't get the message and didn't go together with the other 8 students, and she got terribly harassed. But she stayed on. And over here is a sculpture for the Little Rock 9 that's now in Little Rock. Okay, so there were 56 schools, facilities nominated. We visited 34. In 2018, we came out with a historic context study report, and that report concluded that Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools are of national historic significance, and that a national historical park would be an important enhancement to the national park system. This is an important conclusion. In 2020, we came out with a report on 5 sites in Chicago that could be possible candidates for a visitor center. And if you will remember, I mentioned the executive office building in the Sears development. I mentioned the YMCA. It's now sort of a hostel. I mentioned the Museum of Science and History. And so these are the 5 that were included in the report. In early 2020, it was my last trip before the COVID shutdown. I went to Springfield, Illinois. You can see Julius Rosenwald's boyhood home in the background. It's now the administrative offices for the Lincoln Home National Historic Site. We, in conjunction with the National Park Service and the Springfield Rosenwald Initiative, paid for this historic marker that was put in front of the house on February 12th, 2020. And also the name of the house was officially changed that day from the Lion House to the Rosenwald House. Importantly, most importantly, late last year, this bill, there's a similar bill introduced in the Senate in 2019, but this bill that directs the National Park Service to perform a special resource study of sites associated with Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools passed Congress. It passed the House by 387 to 5. It passed the Senate by unanimous consent, and it went to the White House, where it stayed until January 13th, the very last day in 2019 before it could be signed, and President Trump did sign it. So the National Park Service is in the midst of getting ready for the special resource study, and we are working with them to try to get it done as expeditiously as possible, because after that, we will be working to get legislation introduced to actually create the national park. For your information, both senators from Maryland supported the legislation. Van Hollen and Carden, and several representatives, including Jamie Raskin, David Trone, and I'm drawing a blank, the gentleman who ran for governor, and he's from Prince George's County. So there were 43 members of the House of Representatives that supported the legislation. Another important thing is we just issued, it's available electronically, it hasn't been put up on our website yet, but our report on the 56 school facilities that we visited, and 50 that were recommended, and the 34 that we visited. It came out in August, and we're working on getting the printed version. And one last thing, I hope I haven't worn you all down. And there's not going to be a quiz at the end because there's just too much to quiz, but you can quiz me though. On September 9th, two congressmen, Danny Davis from Illinois, who sponsored the legislation in the House, and from Tennessee, Steve Cohen, sent a letter to President Biden, and it was co-signed by 16 other members of the House, requesting that Julius Rosenwald be presented the Presidential Medal of Freedom, be awarded. He can't be presented because he's not here. There is a historical issuance of it posthumously, and that was to John F. Kennedy. So we are working. I'm supposed to get in touch with Aviva Kempner when she has some time on possibly starting a letter writing campaign. I have contacted a staffer for Senator Durbin, who sponsored the Senate legislation, seeing if Durbin and some other senators might send a similar letter to the president. So this is something we will be working on. And we are working on getting nonprofit organizations to sign on in support of creating the National Historical Park. And to date, we have 77 such organizations representing national parks, historic preservation, schools, support groups for Rosenwald schools, churches, synagogues, Black and Jewish organizations. So if any of you know of any organizations that might be interested in signing on, I'd be happy to hear about it. This, I think, is one of the most important quotes that Julius Rosenwald ever made. All the other pleasures of life seem to wear out, but the pleasure of helping others in distress never does. And that epitomizes the man. Not only did he truly represent tzedakah, he was a mensch, he was a modest man, not a saint, but he deserves to be remembered. And so I'm putting this up. Our website is www.rosenwaldpark.org. And I don't know why this keeps doing this, but you can also contact us at info@rosenwaldpark.org, or you can contact me, Dorothy Canter, CANTER, @rosenwaldpark.org. I appreciate all of you listening. I will say that seeing that documentary has been a transformative experience for me. It has taken me on an odyssey. I have learned so much. And as Helen was speaking before the program began, when the program began, about 6 degrees of separation, there's less than 6 degrees of separation, and it's a continual learning process. And I have been enhanced by it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cantor, for this absolutely amazing presentation. I hope everyone found it as special and informative as I did. I am going to open for questions. If you have a question, you could either use the little raise hand in reactions at the bottom of your screen, or you could type your question in the chat and I will get to you that way.
I'm gonna raise my hand.
And I'm
Helen has a question.
Helen, go ahead.
I don't really have a question, but I wanted to, let's see, am I on screen?
No, Dr. Cantor, would you like to stop the screen share?
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Sorry
There we
about
go.
that.
I just wanted to thank Dorothy because meeting her after seeing the documentary changed my life too. I'm holding up this picture book that Andrew Filer did that Robin was so kind to get for me. And one terrific mention in here, the foreword is by John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, who went to the Rosenwald School. I just have chills saying it. That's all I wanted to say. How
Okay,
much?
Karen Levy has a question. Karen, go ahead.
This is not a question, it's a comment, and it may not be very popular, but I'm a bit concerned about all of this because the state of education for Black kids is abysmal. Some of the things I saw growing up were horrifying, and I'm wondering, I mean, Mr. Rosenwald did a fantastic thing, obviously, and he helped a lot of people, but I'm not sure. I would like to know how Black Americans feel about him and the schools. And it seems to come out of a different kind of a place than where we are now. Civil rights, Black Lives Matter, and the current issues. That's my comment.
Okay, so I'll try to give you an answer. From the Rosenwald schools that we have visited and spoken to the support groups, they're very positive. They have strong feelings about the schools and the education they received. Of course, we've only visited there. It's estimated that there are about 500 that are left now. And as I said, 55 were nominated plus a teacher home. There have been a number of support groups for schools that were not nominated that want to be considered for inclusion in the national park. And I've agreed that the campaign will submit whatever information they give us to the National Park Service, just as we've done with the schools that were recommended. I think that, as I said, the schools back in those days, you know, they were before integration. They were not only a source of learning, but they were a source of community support. And if, you know, the community supported the children, they wanted them to do well, and they sort of applauded when they did do well. And also you have to remember that these schools were the source, not only of John Lewis, but of course he's the most famous, but other people went on and joined the civil rights movement and helped change things in America. And so, I'm no expert on education, but I think community support and the parents' involvement is very important. And somehow if some of the model of the Rosenwald schools could be used today, it could be helpful. I acknowledge that it is a big problem, as I showed with the Dunbar School in Little Rock. You know, after integration, the white people moved to the suburbs, and the money for the schools went to the suburbs. So it's like there's an action and a counteraction, and it keeps on happening. Sorry. Okay, I hope that helps.
Diane Horn has a question. Diane, would you like to unmute?
Thank you. Well, I do have a little question. I was going to ask you, what are most of the supporters of this coming from the Jewish, Jewish organizations? Can you get more, people involved of color on the board or elsewhere? That was a question, but I really wanted to say that watching this movie again really did blow me away too. The list of people who graduated from that school and have become prominent is just astounding. Even Maya Angelou, you don't know. I mean, if you educate one person, that may change a whole family and their whole, their lineage further on. I wasn't sure, honestly, how I felt about this. I didn't feel negatively about it, but I just wasn't sure. But after watching the movie and hearing, especially Dr. Canter, I want to know how I can help. Maybe you can tell us how to get involved in this.
Well, first of all, Helen has been very involved and I appreciate everything she's done and is doing. As I said, if you know organizations that might be interested in signing on, with respect to your first question, as I said, we have 77 organizations.
Right.
We have Black and Jewish organizations. We have more Jewish organizations than Black organizations, but the United Negro College Fund is a supporter. The Urban League is on the list. The NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund is on the list. We have more synagogues on the list than we have churches. We would like to get more churches, particularly Black churches, on the list. And we're trying for that. As I said, we have 11 support groups for Rosenwald schools. So one of the things that you can do is, if you know of an organization, a nonprofit organization that would be willing to support creating the park, let me know, introduce me to the person there by email. I'll write them, give them background. And what I do is when they indicate that they are willing to be supporters, I ask that they submit a confirmatory email and I supply language that they can then personalize and send in. Another way you can help is join our subscriber list and ask your friends to join our subscriber list. I'm hoping, I don't think we're going to get to 1,000 subscribers this year, but the more subscribers, the better known we are, the better it is. By the way, there's another book that I think, if you don't know about it, Stephanie Deutsch's book, which is You Need a Schoolhouse, Booker T. Washington, Julius Rosenwald, and the Building of Schools for the Segregated South. Stephanie is a member of the board. She is the wife of a great-grandson of Julius Rosenwald. With respect to the diversity of the board, 4 of the 15 members are African Americans. One of those is Robert Stanton, who is the first and only Black National Park Service director. And we have geographical diversity, Chicago, Indianapolis, and we have women, fair number of women on the board. So I think we do have a diverse board. And, Stephanie and I have done a lot of webinars and in person, and those are useful. So, and if you have any ideas of your own, I'd appreciate it. The campaign would appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Cantor. I have, I'm going to read out a question from Elliot Sternfeld, 2-part question. Do you know, were all the materials for the schools sourced locally?
No, as a matter of fact, early on, Julius Rosenwald wanted to supply a lot of material from Sears, and Booker T. Washington said, no, you have to, let the people come up with the materials themselves. So I can't truly answer that as to how much came from where. I know, for instance, that I have been told that the desks came from Sears. A lot of the desks came from Sears. There were directions on how to build the schools, but I can't answer the question of how much came from where. There was, as I said, there were specific directions on how to build the schools, the colors to use, the type of windows, et cetera, et cetera. And the second part of the question was?
Well, it was, did Rosenwald employ the Sears home shipping infrastructure at all? But I think you answered that.
I think to some extent, but it wasn't like building the kid houses.
Right. Robin Sorkin, you have a question. Could you please unmute?
I unmuted. Good evening, everyone. And Dr. Cantor, thank you so much. And actually, thank you to my co-chair, Helen Dalton, for introducing me to this effort. I knew nothing. I hadn't heard of Julius Rosenwald. I've only been to one park, maybe. I applaud you, Dr. Cantor. And when I found out about this, I thought it was one of the single coolest things I had ever heard as a Jew. Starting point as a Jew. And I thought, you know what? Okay, it's about time. So there's that. We'll put that aside. If you want to get involved, you guys, join the Social Action Committee, because we are a tributary working on this and putting our efforts toward this. Helen and I feel very strongly about this. And so we would love to have you join us. So that's my pitch. You guys have a good night.
That's not great. Ann Boyd, your hand was up earlier. Did you have a question or no?
Whoops. I just went out for some.
Okay, there you go.
Oh, okay, I'm back on.
Yes.
Okay. I was just going to comment that I attended a school that was Rosenwald School, and right before that, it was converted to another school that was built by the county in McMinn County, Tennessee. But someone had a question about supplies. The schools that we went to were given used books from the white schools, so we never got new books in the Rosenwald schools or in the schools in the rural counties. And that will probably be pretty well universal. If you talk to people that went to Black schools, they were supplied with used books, used desks. Teachers were very brilliant, and they were very resourceful in educating the students. And you're right, it was a community center, and everyone used the school for whatever reason to have group meetings in the community. So it was a very resourceful, it was a great education. I spent 8 years in an all-Black school, and then 2 years in an all-Black high school. But I lived next door to all the white schools in my neighborhood. So in my junior year, I said, I am not waiting on the bus anymore. So I walked next door to the high school. But that's just one of the issues with education in the South. But it made me a better person. I finished college. My kids finished college, and we're doing well. And by the way, there is an original Dunbar School in Loudon, Tennessee, in Loudon County, and it's been restored. So if anyone wants pictures of it, let me know. They have a Facebook page that they support, but there is an original Dunbar Rosenwald School in Loudon, Tennessee. Thank you.
That may be one of the 5 that was recommended by Tennessee. I know there's one in Loudon. I was in Chattanooga last Monday to give a talk, and on Tuesday I went to a Rosenwald School in Pikeville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
The Lincoln School.
The Lincoln School.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get in, but I went around outside, and I went to the municipal building, and I went into this office, and there was a woman sitting at the desk, and there was a man sort of in casual clothes lounging around, and we started talking, and he was telling me about who to contact, and I said to him, in my typical fashion, I said, well, and what is your role here? And he says, well, I'm the mayor.
Oh, wow.
But yes, in most of the schools, yes, got used hand-me-down books, but at some point, the Rosenwald Fund did create a library program and did send out sets of books to a number of schools. And again, it was a challenge grant sort of thing. And because they could buy so many books in bulk, they could get them at a cheaper price. And it was not only for Black schools, but also for white schools, but the Black schools got a better deal than the white schools. So I don't know what percentage of the schools, it was later, like in the 30s, maybe. But yes, most of the schools just got hand-me-down books.
Right, yeah. Love for you to visit Dunbar. I'm on the board of that school, so that's a great school.
Do you have you're a nonprofit, your organization?
Yes, Dunbar Rosenwald School Foundation.
Okay, well, would you be in what?
Yeah,
would
that's what
you-
I was wondering, which should we talk
Yeah,
to you about being
Yes,
on-
absolutely.
I'm going to
Okay.
put you two in contact with each other once
Okay,
we get
all right.
through this
Absolutely,
Q&A.
because-
Thank you so much, Anne.
You know, we have
All
the
right.
St. George School in South Carolina joined on, and yeah,
Okay,
and you know, the San Domingo School, the John Quinton Foundation has signed on, so I appreciate it very much.
okay, thank you.
I think Mr. Backrack.
Yes, but I have two questions before that.
I'm
Lisa's
sorry.
son would like to know if any of the Rosenwald schools are still in operation today.
Okay, well, obviously the Dunbar School in Little Rock is. There's a Mobile County Training School in Mobile, Alabama is still in operation as the middle school. I do not think the original Rosenwald School building still exists. There is a school in Arkansas, not far from Little Rock, that was a 6-teacher school. It's been restored. It is being used as like a Head Start, a preschool center. A small number are, most that have been restored are being used as community centers. There's some that are residences. As a matter of fact, there's a school in Gloucester, Virginia, that was converted to a residence and now is being restored back to well, it's going to be multiple rooms, but it was the Woodville School was a Rosenwald School. So I hope that answers. Very few, but some.
Sarah Kagan would like to know, is it unusual to have a multi-location park, and how does that work?
Yes, it is unusual. It is not unique, but it is unusual. Manhattan Project is a multi-location park. It has more challenges than, you know, everything in one place. I mean, even Manassas Battlefield has different units within the park, but they're, you know, within the same area. One of the things that we went out with when we asked for the recommendations is ask the states how close the schools are to various existing national parks in terms of management. And they did come back and let us know how close these schools are. It'll be up to the, as I said, it'll be up to the National Park Service to decide, you know, which of the schools are in and which are out. And, you know, clearly it's going to be a small number. If there are 500 that are estimated to still exist, 55 were nominated, and the Park Service is going to select 10 or whatever. And there are also about 7 or 8 schools that have, their support groups have contacted us. We are thinking that maybe some sort of network of Rosenwald schools would be useful to create. So as going back to the question per se, it is not unique, it is unusual. There's also a national park in American Samoa that part of its, different parts of it are on 3 different islands, but again, they're relatively close to one another. And I think that's one national park I will not get to see, but who knows? So I hope
Bert,
it answers the question.
would you like to unmute yourself? I see you have your hand up there.
Dorothy, thank you. I'm trying to figure out what you're envisioning as a national park for all these schools. A school building is not what I usually think of as a national park. I think of huge expanses, lots of green, campgrounds, park rangers, but how do you see these parks developing?
Okay, so first of all, most people think the way you think, but of the 423 units, 2/3 are historic cultural resources. So like the reconstructed birthplace of Theodore Roosevelt is a national park unit. The house in which Theodore Roosevelt was sworn in as president after McKinley was killed in Buffalo is a national park unit. The home of John Adams is a national park unit. The Washington Memorial, the Lincoln Monument, Washington Monument, Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, Lincoln's birthplace, Lincoln's home in Springfield, although it's a historic district, are national parks. So most of the national park units are not Yosemite, Yellowstone, Shenandoah. And the challenge here is that they'll be in multiple locations. But the vision, my vision, and I think that of the campaign, is that the visitor center in Chicago will tell the whole encompassing story. And I can see that possibly one of the smaller Rosenwald schools from the South that's not going to be restored, that will, if not restored, will eventually crumble in the ground, could be brought up, and the visitor center could be built around it, because the story includes, you know, Sears, it includes the schools, it includes the fellowships, it includes the Museum of Science and Industry, it includes just so many things. And so I can see that being the centerpiece. And then these Rosenwald schools that are selected in the South that tell specific stories would be a part of it. And the management would probably be those in the South, more on a day-to-day basis with Park Service sites that are close to the schools. So I hope that that's the vision. I mean, we're, you know, it's a challenge, but we're going to do it.
I have one last question in the chat from Michelle Goldstein. Have you reached out to the alumni of historically Black colleges for financial support?
No, and nor have we reached out yet for, you know, support on for creating the park. One of our board members attended Morehouse and then went on to Harvard University, the business school. We haven't really gone on a fundraising campaign yet. We're now looking into establishing, while we're waiting for the National Park Service to create, for the legislation to create the national park, which we hope will be done by December 31st, 2024. And you can figure that one out if you'd like. But we're doing research to see about opening a temporary Julius Rosenwald exhibition center in Chicago. And we're also looking into possibly having visiting exhibitions, traveling exhibitions. But the answer to the question per se is no, we haven't reached out to them, nor have we reached out to any organization specifically yet. It's all been volunteers, donors.
Does anyone up? I see one question, a hand raised over there. Sana, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you. And Dorothy, thank you for a really wonderful educational presentation. I put this note in the chat, but I just wanted to, the last comment, I just want to raise this up. I have no idea how your entity and others interested in this work coordinate, but at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta right now, there's an absolutely spectacular photography exhibit. I mean, and very comprehensive. It goes all around the top floor. We had the pleasure of visiting this summer, but you know, when you talk about a collection of photographs and whatnot at your visitor center, I don't know who did this beautiful exhibit. I don't know if it's temporary or permanent, but I mean, I would love to think we could all capture what's there, which is wonderful, and tie it together.
So that exhibition is of photographs from Andrew Filer's book that I mentioned and that Helen mentioned. You can buy his book on Amazon. It's really worthwhile. Andrew joined our, and some of the photos in this presentation were Andrew's. He joined our advisory council and he's working with us. He understands that part of his legacy will be not only the book and what he has captured in the book, but helping to create the national park. And I've been to see it at the Atlanta Museum as well. It's, you walk up the steps and it's in that round area and beyond. So yes, that's important because those stories are really meaningful, and some of them are very poignant. So
It's also,
yeah,
I think, very
Andrew,
poignant.
I don't know when he's coming to Washington, but he's going to be giving a talk at the Washington Hebrew congregation in the winter, I believe. And so Helen, when I know, I'll let you know. He's going around the country giving talks. And as a matter of fact, I bought 4 of his photographs and put it in my office.
Wow.
One of them is the one of John Lewis. Yes.
May I make one last comment? I think Andrew Fowler, if I'm not mistaken, didn't I see him with you or on a Smithsonian
Well, he,
lecture, a Zoom thing that may be on the record as well in their records of Smithsonian?
he, on June 24th, he and Stephanie Deutsch and I for
Right.
NPCA, but he's also been for the Building Museum. He's been on a lot of Zoom presentations.
But that should be in their records if anyone wanted to see it. And I want to just mention
It should be in ours, and I'm going to make a note of that.
one other shout out. Dorothy, Dr. Canter mentioned writers and artists and entertainers and all the students, but a shout out in terms of what the students had available to them to learn. Katherine Johnson, who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama, recently passed away. Katherine Johnson, who was the personal computer in
Yes.
Hidden Figures,
Yes.
and without whom John Glenn would not have gone up into space without her calculations. Katherine Johnson was a teacher at a Rosenwald School. So it just spans the gamut. How many people did she influence thanks to Julius Rosenwald and set them on a career path?
But not only that,
Leave her out.
yeah, and not only that, but we had in one of our, I guess it was a campaign update this year. And we read it in her memoir, not only was she a teacher at a Rosenwald School, but when she went to, I think it's called West Virginia State University now, it's a historically Black college and university. Her teacher, who made up special courses for her, was subsequently a Rosenwald Fellow. And I'm sorry, I can't remember his name now. And he ended up then teaching at Howard University. So it's.
Yeah.
And one of the things we have to do is we have to get our newsletters and campaign updates up on our website, but that's on the to-do list.
All right. Catherine, I want to thank you so much. This has been so informative and just so interesting. And Helen and Robin, I'm so delighted that our committees are working together like this. It's terrific. Just as a little aside, I was reading an article in the New Yorker a couple of weeks ago. In the first paragraph, there was a reference to the Rosenwald schools. And really, had it not been for Helen, I wouldn't have even known what they were referencing. And I am seeing more and more about it. And I'm delighted. It's very timely that you're sharing this with us. And we certainly will all try to come behind you and help with whatever efforts we can do. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of information and
Thank
time
you.
with us. It's beautiful.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I look forward to hearing from you. We need
Sure.
all the help we
Yes.
can get. Thank you.
Thank you.